The city woke with a cough and a curse. Smoke from 1,000 cookfires steeped the morning, slicking the air with the smell of tallow and onions and tar, and the bells of the great September chased one another over the roofs like restless gulls. From the windows of the Tower of the Hand, Eddard Stark watched dawn climb the red stone of Aegon's high hill, watched light strike the spears on the city walls and lay long bronze fingers over the river. When the wind turned, it brought the sea salt and rot and fish, and all the bustling life of King's Landing came with it. He set his hands on the sill and tried to imagine frost there instead of warmth, the thin knife of northern cold instead of this southern stew. But the red keep clung to summer like a jealous lover. Even the shadows were warm. Behind him, Jon stood tugging at his glove with teeth he should have outgrown by now. "They'll be holding the first tilts before noon," the boy said, muffled around leather. "Jory says if we go early, we can get a place close to the list." Jory is probably right. Ned did not turn. He did not trust his face this morning. The city had a way of reading a man he had not known to be readable. "I've never seen a great tourney," Jon went on, and there was a brightness in his voice that had not often lived there since their arrival. It stirred something gentle and unguarded in Ned's chest, as dangerous as a bare throat. "You've seen better things," Ned said. "A winter wolf on fresh snow. That's worth 1,000 justs." Jon laughed, brief and low. "You say so. Jory says the Southrons use froth and banners to hide they cannot keep their feet in snow. Jory has a loyal tongue." He let himself look then. The boy had put his glove on backward and was scowling at it, irritated with himself, refusing to ask for help. His hair was as black and unruly as always, his mouth set too often in a line. When he smiled, it made you want to build a house around the smile, keep it from weather. He was leaner since the road, broader in the shoulders. All winter children grow in spring. Ned crossed to him and took the glove without a word. He turned it and returned it and watched Jon force his fingers into the right holes. "You'll ride with me," he said, "and you'll remember who you are." Jon let out a breath that was almost a scoff. "A bastard of Winterfell," he said lightly. There was steel there too. A bastard. The word had always been a shield he had offered the boy against sharper blades. It had become a blade as well. Lyanna had never heard the word from his mouth. She had only said over and over, "Promise me." He had kept that promise like a fever, through winters and harvests, through wars and the slow wearing of peace. He had kept it when Cat's eyes were red-rimmed with the hurt of it, kept it when he had to invent lies and hold them up long enough that they looked like truth. Lies had weight. They bent a man. The gods knew he bent. "Your father's son," he said. "If any man asks, answer him with that and ask him the name of his own." Jon's mouth twitched. "Aye, my lord," he said, and there was a touch of mischief that reminded Ned of Benjen in his first mail. Too quick with a jest and too poor at knowing when to set it by. Jory rapped the door and came in with that easy stride of his, bowing not quite far enough to be southern and not so slight as to shame his lord. "The king's men are already down in the yard, my lord," he said. "Renly's green boys as well. If we aim to reach the lists with skins intact, we'd best go now." "We're going," Ned said. He took up his cloak, gray shot through with dull steel thread, a poor match for the red stone and gold banners of the keep, and he liked it for that. Down the tower stairs the air grew cooler and smelled of stone and linen. Arya's thin laughter echoed briefly somewhere below. Septa Mordane's scolding chased it. Sansa's voice, a murmur, one of the little songs that came to her as easily as breath. He carried all those sounds with him like a man carries flints and tinder, comforting and dangerous both. The yard boiled. Lannister crimson flashed like scattered coals, and the gold of the king's household shone too new in the sun, as if all the luster came from polish rather than deeds. Renly Baratheon stood with a cluster of bright young men, all feathers and jewels and smooth cheeks. The youngest one, green and glorious, wore 3 golden roses on his surcoat and smiled with every part of his face as if smiling were an oath. Sirs Barristan Selmy and Jaime Lannister spoke together at the edge of the yard like 2 lions that had agreed not to show their teeth. Ned felt rather than saw the shift as he stepped into them. the way men's spines seemed to straighten, the old guard slipping into old habits. The hound stood in the shadow of a pillar, helm in the crook of his arm, scar glistening, eyes bored and watchful. He watched everything. "Lord Stark," Renly cried, his voice full of summer wine. "You look like you slept in your mail. Come, see what we've scraped together for the king. If the heat doesn't slay him first, he might die of joy." Ned offered a polite incline of the head, the most he had for courtesies this morning. "Lord Renly," he said.
Ser Barristan.
"Lord Hand," Ser Barristan replied, grave and courtly. "We are honored by your presence. The king will be glad of you at his side." "The king is better glad of cups at his side," Jaime said, lazy as a cat full of cream. "But a Northman will do when a cup is empty." Ned's eyes slid to him and away again, as one glances at a cliff he knows may fall. Jaime smiled as if the cliff had chosen to call itself a hill. Jon was beside him, straight-backed, chin high, trying to decide if he ought to look or not look at the Kingslayer. The hound saw the boy see and snorted softly. They went down through the city together. The king rode out later than was wise under such heat, but he was the king and the city thronged regardless. Small folk swarmed the streets, faces upturned, faces made of hunger and mirth and hard living, throwing flowers that turned to mush under hooves, spilling wine that turned to mud. The list stood east of the city, a long scar cut into scrub, stands raised too quickly and bunting hung with all the care of a hurried lie. The flags caught the weak breeze and made more wind with their own flapping. The crowd roared when it had no reason and roared again when the reason came. Robert sat a throne of carved wood and iron on a shade-drawn dais, his sword across his knees, his belly pressed into the edge of his breastplate, his beard oiled and curling. Cersei sat beside him, a red jewel at her throat that looked like a drop of blood that had been taught to behave itself. Joffrey perched on the other side, restless, fingers tapping, his face arranged into what he thought a prince's face should be. Tommen and Myrcella leaned close to each other, whispering and giggling. At times they seemed the only children in the city. Ned took his place, and Jon stood behind him with Jory, his eyes devouring everything, greedy as any boy and twice as quiet. Sansa sat with Septa Mordain among the ladies, fresh as a rose from the Wintertown greenhouse, her hair catching the light like autumn wheat. Arya wriggled, earning herself a pinch and then another, under which she only grew leaner and longer and, if anything, less inclined to stillness. The first clash of lances jarred the air, a wooden crack that echoed in the chest. The king hooted. He shouted for blood. He slapped Lancel Baratheon, his pale young cousin and squire, on the back so hard the lad nearly went to his knees.
Cersei drank.
Renly played at court with his eyes and mouth, sending glances to the Knight of the Billowing Roses and receiving glances in turn. Littlefinger drifted up as a shadow with a gem in it, hands clasped, mouth faintly amused, eyes counting. They shivered under the heat and the roar and the jounce of men falling and the dusty light that turned sweat into a second skin. A man broke his collarbone, and the crowd groaned as if it could feel the bone in its own throat. The king's cheer rose. Ned watched, attentive but not enchanted. He had seen men ride at each other for reasons that did not end with a bow, and he knew that practice did not perfect everything a man might need to know. The young Tyrell won and won and won again, golden and absurdly beautiful, and when he pulled up before the stands he lifted his visor and the scream that went up from the ladies might have knocked a smaller boy off his feet. The Knight of Flowers, they called him, and he was as much a flower as any man in steel could be. He turned his head, there was calculation in it, for all his youth, and offered to the maidens a smile like sunlight. His eyes passed over them gently until they came to rest on Sansa Stark, and Ned saw how his daughter went very still and how a spot of color climbed her throat and cheek. The boy's mouth softened, and he reached to his saddle and produced a white rose and leaned over the railing to present it. Sansa's lips parted as if to take it into her mouth. She took it in her fingers, trembling. Septa Mordain practically glowed with triumph, as if she had placed the bloom there herself. Cersei's mouth curled in a way that would look like warmth to anyone who needed to be fooled. Joffrey watched this with all the grace of a child denied a sweet. He traced the line of Sansa's cheek with his eyes, and then down to the rose, and then up to Jon, who was watching with a fond small smile he likely didn't know he wore. The prince's gaze latched there, and a reef of feeling showed beyond the waterline of his pretty face. "What is this?" Robert said, delighted. "Boy, if you can't eat a rose, it's not worth riding for." Lancel laughed at the wrong time because he had not yet learned there is no right time to laugh for a man like Robert Baratheon. The king swatted him again. "Cousin," Robert barked. "Wine." "Your grace," Lancel stammered, scrambling. They rode. They fell. They rose and bowed. The mountain rode. The ground seemed to lean under him. A stallion as dark as old wine carried him and didn't dare step poorly. The man's helm ate the sun and spat sparks. His sword, when he bore it, looked like a scythe fit for reaping men. When the Tyrell lad faced him, the North groaned in Ned's heart. A boy and a thing like that. Then the boy loosed a mare in heat against the mountain's warhorse, and the world tipped in another way. The black stallion screamed, a sound of iron tearing, and the mountain's spear went wild. The flower unhorsed the mountain. For a heat length the stands neither breathed nor spoke. Then the mountain was on his feet, and his sword came free like a held breath finally gasping out. He swung it at the boy as if cutting wheat. The hound moved before Ned did, leaping into the path of the blade like a dog springing a boar. Steel clanged to steel and sparks spit and died. Gregor Clegane's voice was the sound of grinding stone. Sandor Clegane's was almost a growl. They went at each other not like knights but like men who had met before in a yard without helms and remembered too much of it. "Stop the madness," Cersei said, standing. Her voice was calm and sharp, cut through very little. "Let them," Robert said, leaning forward as if he could push them together with his hands. "Let them." Barristan Selmy rose as well, but custom and king held him for one heartbeat too long. Then Robert, perhaps remembering the law and the spectacle and the way a crowd can turn when shown too much of men's insides, bellowed for an end. The hound went to a knee, panting, his sword across his palms. The mountain made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter ever killed folk. Then he stalked off without waiting for the horn, chopping his horse's head off with a stroke as he went. The animal's blood ran black in the heat, and the crowd roared because it had decided it should. Ned looked back to Jon without thinking, seeking to judge the shape of the boy's face after all that. Jon's eyes were not wide. They were narrowed, as if he were trying to see something far away and precise. And there was disgust there and a certain hunger too, not the kind a man sates with stew. The hound's scar was very red where he had gone to one knee. He looked up and saw the boy looking. They stared at each other for a small moment as if measuring whether the thing in the other was a wound or a blade. "Good sport," Robert murmured, settling back, smiling like a man who has decided to be pleased and so is. "The gods made tourneys for old men who drink and young men who wish to die. Come, Ned, drink. Lancel, be quicker or we'll starve." Lancel poured. Ned took the cup because refusing small things is sometimes more work than refusing large. The wine was too sweet and too warm. He set it aside like a small lie and was surprised to find Littlefinger watching his hand. The man tilted his head and smiled as if a game was in play only he knew the rules of. Ned wondered if he knew any games where the rules mattered. The heat pressed. The day stretched, bright as a blade. The king grew easier, his speech thicker, his laughter faster. On the field, banners broke and bodies fell and rose again, and honor was performed and dusted off and performed again. The sort of thing the South believes draws blood from the past and puts it back. By late afternoon, even the roar of the crowd had gone hoarse, and the second shadow of day inched toward the city walls. Ned felt it then, that twitch of fate that tells a man the step he is about to take will change his gait forever. Robert summoned him closer with fingers greasy from meat and wine. "Ned," he said, his voice too loud for closeness.
Ned, Ned.
"You mope like a widow. Come, does my tourney not please?" "It pleases your grace," Ned said. because arguments in public are like trying to swim in full mail. "Ha!" Robert said. He glanced past Ned at John, then back again, then past again. "Who's this cold shadow at your back? The one with the stark eyes and the wrong name." Ned went still. Cersei looked over slowly as a cat looking at a leaf and deciding whether to pounce. Joffrey had been speaking to Sansa. His voice ceased like a candle snuffed. "Jon," Robert said, rolling the name around his mouth. "Jon Snow, Bauble of the North. You wear a bastard's name, boy." Jon stiffened at being addressed. He moved around Jory's shoulder a fraction, enough to be seen. He kept his head level and his mouth quiet. "I do, your grace." "Who then put it in you?" Ned felt every gaze that mattered. He felt Littlefinger's like a draft, Varys's like a soft tap on the shoulder, Barristan Selmy's like the weight of a hand that had steadied kings. "I did, your grace," he said. He did not look away from Robert's eyes. Robert's laugh was loud and quick. "All right then. You should never breed from wolves. They eat the furniture. Take a good look, Cersei. In the north, they plant them in the snow and they sprout up like weeds. By the gods, I envy you. A man should leave sons in every bed he's ever used." Cersei smiled without her eyes. "Some men," she said. Robert waved the words away like a fly. "I'm moved to generosity," he declared to the world, throwing his arms wide. "This city is a boil, but it's my boil, and today it itches sweetly. Ned, this boy's yours. Let's make him your boy properly. By my word, by my hand. Lancel, who do I need for this?" "Grand Maester Pycelle has the Great Seal, your grace," Lancel said, head down, eyes like chips of soap. "It would require only my word and his name written on the paper." Robert went on, in love with what he was saying. "We'll wipe snow off him and set Stark where it belongs. The North is dull if it can't find a use for one more Stark." A silence like a held breath lay over the dais. Cersei's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. Joffrey rubbed his lip with his thumb and did not know he was doing it. Sansa had gone white. Arya had gone stone. Ned stood in a place he had never expected to stand, a place he had always known he might. He saw Lyanna's face as it had looked the last time he saw it. Not yet dead, already leaving. He heard her say the words he had learned by heart, and he measured them against the boy's shoulders. "If I refuse," he said very softly, "do I insult the king?" Robert leaned back and hawked laughter. You couldn't insult me if you put on a dress. Take it as a gift. I am a generous friend. Gifts kill men as surely as swords." Ned felt Jory's breath behind him, steady as a horse's. He felt Jon's unsteadiness, hidden under stance. He felt the eyes of the city leaning on him, waiting to make a story that would live longer than any of them. "Promise me." Ned closed his eyes for the length of a blink. "Winter comes for everyone." He opened his eyes and bowed his head. "Then I accept your grace," he said, and when the words left him, something in his chest unclenched and something else cinched tight. He turned, and the boy he had raised looked as if the sun had struck him lengthwise. Surprise and fear and a treacherous hope moved in Jon's face all at once like fish in shallow water. Ned placed his hand on Jon's shoulder. It felt like placing a stone very carefully so that a wall would hold. He guided Jon forward. They walked together to the king. "Your grace," Jon said, and bent his head. His voice did not quite fail him. Robert's hand came down on Jon's head and ruffled the black hair like it was a dog's. "Rise then, Jon Stark," he cried loudly, and the name flung itself into the crowd and found 1,000 ears eager to catch it and shout it back. "Rise, there. A wolf properly named is only more trouble. Lancel, wine, gods damn you. Pycelle, where's that bag of bones? Bring the seal. We'll make a pretty paper of it and hang it in the sept if the gods need convincing." The Grand Maester came waddling fretfully, spots deep as plums, hair thin as courage. He had the seal in a ribbon bag, and he unstoppered a pot of wax and breathed very seriously at every piece of it as if breath made law. Robert ordered the words and Pycelle molded them into letters that would lie heavy on the north. Cersei watched and smiled and would not be outdone by paper. Littlefinger leaned too close and stepped back precisely far enough. Varys looked at the boy's face with something like pity, then at Ned's face with something like sorrow, then at the king with something no word would perfectly fit. When the wax dried and the green dragon's glass had bitten it and the king had scrawled his ragged name, Robert thrust the parchment at Ned. "Hang it somewhere Cat will never have to see it," he said merrily. "You've done your duty by the realm and your mischief by your household both in one stroke. Gods love a man who can do two things at once." Ned took the parchment and felt it hot through the leather of his glove. "Thank you, your grace," he said. Cersei stood. "What sweet house business is this?" she asked to those who would listen. "A northern heir made of a Southron whim. The north must be very poor in heirs." "Not poor in wolves," Robert said. "Careful your sheep." He rose. The day had finally got its teeth into him. He was drunk and merry and bored. "That's enough splinters and dust for me. Let's find meat, Cersei. Renly, bring that Rose boy to supper and we'll put him in a dress and see if he still takes prizes." The king departed in a spray of guards and laughter. The city had heard the name. It went out like the first flake in a snow that becomes a storm. Jon did not speak until they were within the cool hush of the Hand's Tower again. The stone there remembered winter in a way the stone could not. He stood in Ned's solar and looked at his hands as if he might find a new line in them. "This is real?" he asked finally, the voice of a boy who does not know if the trick is still playing on him. "It is as real as the king's paper," Ned said. He set the parchment on the table where any man might see it and felt again the heat of it bleed through. "The law is a thing you can pick up and throw or drop and break. Best we get used to the weight." Jon lifted his eyes, and their darkness caught all the little lights in the room and kept them. "I did not ask for it. I know. It changes everything. Everyone." "I know," Ned said again. The words did not help, but they were true. "It changes you, and that is what matters to me. The rest I will bear." Jon's mouth twisted. "You will bear, Cat. I have borne harder winters," Ned said, but he said it gently. Then he added, because this was a day for too much truth, "I do not expect her to understand. I expect to be kinder to her than she can be to me." Jon let out a breath that sounded too old. "Robb," he said, "I am older." "By a moon," Ned said. "Maybe less, but you are older. In the north, older is heir. In the north, the Lord names his heir." Ned kept his voice level, steady as a plumb line. "Hear me now, Jon, and keep this as your own. I have a duty to Winterfell and a duty to my son Robb and a duty to you, and none of them can be set aside. You will not be set to war with your brother." "War," Jon said softly, as if he had never found the shape of the word until now. He stared at the table, at the green wax dragonbite, at the clean, firm letters that looked like they had never once doubted themselves. "If the lords make words of this, it will be war." "The lords always make words," Ned said. He laid his hand on the boy's shoulder again, and it fit as if the gods had carved the bone for that purpose. "We will choose the ones we answer." Jory eased the door with a knuckle. His eyes said he had seen half of what had lain in the room and guessed the other half. "My lord," he said, "Renly's man is here with an invitation." "To what?" "To everyone," Jory said with dry northern disdain. "Supper." "Of course," Ned said. "Tell him we will come." If the tourney was a roar, the supper was a murmur. Courtiers fed on talk and wine and glances, and the meat was there to give their mouths something else to do when they needed to pretend. The night of flowers shone as if the candles had been fashioned to flatter him. Sansa watched him as if her eyes themselves had learned a new way to be eyes. Joffrey watched Sansa. Cersei watched everyone and no one. Renly laughed and let the laughter wash over his concern. Varys smiled with his mouth and not at all with his eyes. Littlefinger with his eyes and not at all with his mouth. The boy from the yard, Gendry, whose name Ned had only that day wrested from Tobo Mott along with the knowledge that the child had belonged to Robert as much as his hammer, was not at supper. Ned found himself thinking of the lad's blue eyes and black hair, of the jaw that could have been drawn from a book of lineages as easily as from desire. He thought of the book he had pored over in his solar until the letters had swum and the names had risen like drowned men. The seed is strong. The Tyrell boy was flattered and flattered again. Joffrey's mouth thinned. Arya stole a peach and made good of it. The hound stood behind Joffrey and did not move, but his eyes moved everywhere. Jon sat among the hand's guard, where a bastard would have sat and where a newly named son had chosen still to sit. That made Ned both proud and afraid. He ought not to have sought Cersei in the Godswood that night. He had learned long ago that he ought not seek fires when he wished not to be burned. But the day had upset too many careful balances, and the Godswood was the one place in the Red Keep that pretended at quiet. It had no weirwood, not a true one, only a pale-barked tree that had learned its lessons among walls rather than the cold, and the pool there never knew ice. Still, a man could pretend at prayer. Cersei came like a woman walking through tall grass, barely bending anything she passed. She looked at the yard's thin trees and the artificial stone and smiled as if the place were a secret joke between them. "You do not belong in this city," she said without greeting. "It will crack you like a nut." "I belong where the king sets me," Ned said. "The king sets his cup wherever he will, and that does not make the cup his friend." She stepped into the spots of moonlight that fell like coins. "You have taken a thing from me today. You were not promised it," Ned said. "Even here, vows matter." She smiled. "You are a rarity, Stark. An honest man." Honest men think vows matter until someone understands the words better. You have made a bastard legitimate. Do you flatter yourself that this is kindness? I do not flatter myself with anything. Catelyn Stark does not flatter you either. The Queen's eyes were pretty with the prettiness of something with teeth. Your boy is a wolf now, by the king's whim. He is a wolf with ambition set under his skin by men who will use it to lead him into traps. The North will split, some for your stepson, some for your trueborn son, and while your sons bleed for you, the Lannisters will harvest. Renly will smile, Varys will whisper, Littlefinger will count, and I will win. You speak as if the realm were a game you can play by yourself, Ned said. I see men, not pieces. They are the same thing. The only difference is that you would rather not see the board. She stepped closer. Leave Lord Stark. Take your son, both your sons, and go home. This city will strip your bones. It is not your city, and it is not yours. Her voice softened. I will say this for nothing because I want more than I want you humbled. Joffrey is not your friend, and he is not your daughter's friend. I do not hate your little girl. She is foolish and southern, and I should like to teach her. But she is not mine, and I cannot save fools. Save her yourself. He watched her and weighed whether what she said was warning or mischief or both. In the end, who gives a warning and who receives it matters less than whether you took it seriously. I will save my children, he said. Do that, she said. And do not ask for thanks when you must choose one over another. She left him then. The gods would breathe. He sat with the false tree and tried to pretend the face carved into it somewhere he could not see was watching. Jon could not sleep that night. The name sat on his chest like a cat. He turned and kept finding it no matter where he turned to. Stark. He had worn a bastard's name like a comfortable cloak, ugly and warm. Snow had fit the boy who could not sit with his lord's lady, who learned to love cold because the hearth was not for him. Stark tasted strange, like a feast too rich for a man who had not had breakfast. He stole to the yard as the hour found its pale middle. The moon had sucked the color out of the world and left it as chalk and shadow. He took a wooden sword and drowned himself in movement because a man cannot think when he is holding his breath. The cracks of wood sounded too loud and too alone. The yard was not empty. After a while he felt eyes. They'll make you spar with men who'll hurt you, a voice said. It was the hounds. Sandor Clegane leaned on a post like a man who had married the post and did not expect it to be faithful. Jon kept his guard up. I have sparred with men before. Have you? The hound's laugh had no joy in it. You spar with boys who love you and old men who don't wish to get called before your lord. You'll learn faster here, if you survive it. Will you teach me? The boldness was out of John's mouth before he could weigh it. Perhaps it had lived there waiting for this very man. Sandor looked at him as if deciding whether a stray dog would do, then shrugged. If you don't whine. I do not whine. We'll see. He took up a wooden blade and set his feet. Again, they went at it. The hound moved like a man carrying heavy things lightly. He hit hard and often, and when John thought harder and expected harder, the blow came soft and somewhere else, precisely where he had left himself open. He learned in minutes that he kept chewing his lip before he made a high strike, and he learned it because Sandor knocked his wooden sword out of his hand 3 times in a row and said nothing at all about the lip, only watched John correct it and then stopped knocking the sword free. He learned that the man's scar did not matter because men move the same with one good side and one bad side unless they are trying to make you think of the bad side. They broke only when the moon had moved across half the yard. Sandor dropped his wooden sword and reached for a skin and took a swallow and offered it without making a show of offering it. John drank and coughed because it burned like punishment. You fight like a lord's son, the hound said. I am one, John said. He did not know if he was being tested. You weren't yesterday. Try not to make it worse than it has to be. He pulled the helm from where he'd set it. They'll come for your sister first when they come. She's more useful than you. Then they'll come for you. You're more fun. You speak as if they're already coming. They're always coming. He settled his helm on his ruined head and became the thing men saw, half dog, half iron rumor. Sleep when you can, boy. You look like a fool when you're tired. In the morning, the city had new talk. It carried names in it. John Stark, the snow-made wolf. The hand who took a gift. The king who gave one away. But the talk had other names threaded through too. Men at Tobomat's whispered of a boy with blue eyes and black hair. A boy who worked like a man and swung a hammer that would one day pound the shape of battles. Varys's little birds whispered of a queen who made a list and a lord who read in the dark and a knight who wore lion and smiled with all his teeth. The talk found Littlefinger at his counting table and made him smile at the wrong sum on purpose. It found Pycelle struggling to his feet and took the air from him. It found Renly, and he grinned and set another feather in his cap and went hunting at supper for the right man to show the right smile to. It found a slow boy in the kitchens and made him drop a platter because he had never heard that bastards could be anything but snow. It found Sansa in her room and filled it until she could not hear herself. She clutched the white rose and did not know whether to hide it. Robb Stark read a raven letter in the solar at Winterfell with his mother beside him, and his face did not change, and that was as loud as a shout. Maester Luwin's fingers did not tremble as he turned the parchment and placed it away. Law, he said mildly, and Catelyn's mouth became a thin, hard line. In the yard below, Bran watched the sky and did not know yet he would never stand again. In the hot damp of the glass gardens, a boy who smelled of earth and green things whispered to himself about wolves and kings in a language green things might understand. Waiting is the most expensive thing a man can buy in King's Landing. Ned learned this. He sent Jory to this man, and he went himself to the armorer and to the bookseller and to the man who had given him a list of names for men who had died in the wrong order. He found Gendry in the forge and looked at a boy who could have been Robert as Robert had been in the morning of Robert's life, and his hands tightened on air. He bought a helm to have an excuse to be there. He bought a second one because the first excuse had not been enough. He bought a third because he intended to come again. Jon went to the yard and learned to use his feet better and his pride less. He went to the kitchens and ate with Jory and with Fat Tom and often with Arya, who escaped the Septa's net as if born to fishing and not being caught by it. He watched his sister dance with the man from Braavos, the one with the soft hands that were also knives, and he tried to learn the way Arya learned, by watching and failing and laughing because he had failed so much better when he laughed. He went to the Godswood and tried to pray to a tree that was only a tree, and when nothing looked back at him, he took his prayer as a thing he owned and held on to it anyway. The city kept finding him. It found him on the Street of Steel when Tobomat bowed more deeply than a master at his anvil had any right to bow. It found him in the royal yard when Prince Joffrey strolled in with the hound at his back and a lazy cruelty on his lips. So, Joffrey said, stopping too close, Father's Hands bastard is Hands Trueborn now. Does it fix your manners? or only your name?" "My name never had manners," Jon said, pleasant as he could make himself. "And your name always had too many." The hound's snort was almost hidden by the clatter of practice blades striking practice shields. Joffrey's cheeks colored that careful little color that is half vanity and half blood. "You forget to say my prince," he said. "I do not forget," Jon said. "Bow," Joffrey said. Jon did not. He set the point of his practice blade on the ground and leaned both hands on the crossguard and looked at Joffrey as if he had not said anything yet. The world held its breath for 3 heartbeats. The hound moved his weight from one foot to the other and did not otherwise move. "You are tiresome," Joffrey said finally, and he spun on his heel and walked away because truly powerful men can afford to walk away and boys pretending at power cannot afford to look like they cannot. The hound looked back once as they went, one eye on Jon, and whatever he thought, he kept to himself. The Raven came the next day to whisper that Catelyn Stark had taken Tyrion Lannister on the high road to the Eyrie. Ravens are bad at whispering. The city did the shouting for them. Jaime Lannister found them in a brothel where Littlefinger had been very helpful in arranging for Lord Stark to arrive at the precise wrong time, and the streets turned into a narrow place for men to die. Jory died there, with his sword half out and his face very surprised to learn he was dying in the south. Others died too. Men who had eaten at Ned's table 5 nights before and laughed at Arya's joke about swords being needles and laughed too much to hide their kindness. Ned went down on a knee with a broken leg and a head full of light. Jaime Lannister smiled down and left him breathing because killing an enemy quickly is sometimes stupid when you can kill him slower with better music. He did not call it that. He only swept his golden hair back and rode away, leaving blood on the stones to dry in a pattern the city would remember longer than it remembered the names of the dead. Jon had been elsewhere, training, learning, living, when a man came running and said words that did not fit together at first. He reached the brothel with Ghost at his heel. No, not Ghost. There were no dire wolves in this city, but there was a street dog that had made itself his and refused to be dissuaded, and it moved like a ghost and had eyes like a penny that had been lost and lost again. The dog found the blood first. Jon found Jory next, and then he found the shape his own face took when he realized Jory would never again clap him on the shoulder and tell him to hold his sword lower when he went high. He wanted to scream, but he had learned young that a man who cries in the yard is a man who feels it doubly when blows come. He did not cry there either. He found his father with men who were not his and made them move aside with a voice he had not used before. The king swore and drank and promised justice as men promise coins with other men's names on them. The queen smiled and made sure the gold cloaks were reminded who paid them, and Littlefinger smiled more quietly and made sure they were reminded again. The city leaned into itself, waiting for a crack. Renly fled like a bird sensing a storm. The Tyrells counted their feathers and decided which ones they could afford to lose. Varys sighed, and his sigh made 100 small drafts in 100 small rooms. Robert went hunting because when the world will not be what you tell it to be, a boar will sometimes oblige you. He drank first and during and after, and so he could not tell the difference between the wine Lancel poured as a cupbearer and a poisoner's wine, because they were the same. When they brought him back to the Red Keep, he was already an end waiting to be written in the right hand. He told Ned to write it. He told Ned to write Stannis' name, because in that hour he remembered that words have bones under the meat and that his had been built on the bones of a lie too long. He died as he had lived, loud and swearing and boasting, and then suddenly small. Ned Stark wrote the name. He wrote truth on the paper in a city that had little use for it, and he carried it like a sword that would cut lies simply because it was real. Some swords are made for ceremony. This one was not. He went to Cersei then, because a man who has decided on honor must sometimes tell his enemy and give her time to prepare her counterstroke. He told her he knew her children's father. He told her to flee, though he could have told her nothing. He told her because he thought giving a woman a chance to save her children was a thing a Stark could do and not be ashamed before his gods. She did not flee. She smiled the way beautiful women smile when they have learned very young that mercy is a currency they do not need to keep in the house. She spoke softly about claws, and he imagined he felt them. Then she called for the city watch. Littlefinger came to him in the night and set a cup on his table and lit a candle and put out a hand as if to help a friend stand from a low stool. "Come, Ned," he said, his voice like a harp string, thin and persuasive. "Write your truths and keep them to read when you are an old man in your own bed in the north. Let the boy have his crown. Let me have the city watch. Varys will waggle his hands and we will clap, and the Manderleys will send up fat fish and not fat men, and perhaps the realm will not tear itself in half by dinner. Stannis is the king," Ned said. "Stannis is the king of books," Littlefinger said, smiling. "Joffrey is the king of now. You do not need to love him. You need to live in his time." He leaned in. "You have a son now in this city whom you have made interesting. If you love him, do not let him learn what the word interesting really buys. Let him go north. Let him become dull with snow. Choose which truth you will live in. None of them are the one you want." Ned drank nothing and slept not at all. In the morning, he went to the throne room with his men and his paper and his honor and the certainty that men lose. Jon went with him because he had learned households are only households when you stand in them. Sansa had begged him to leave her out of it, in tears and half-sung protests and with the white rose crushed and reeking between her fingers. Arya had slipped away long before, Sirio's hands on her shoulders, teaching her to move like water between stones. The throne room stank of oil and iron and fear. It was full of men who could have been good at other things if they had ever been asked to be. The Iron Throne rose like a pile of bad decisions. Joffrey sat it as if it had agreed to let him sit. Cersei stood at his side in a gown that made her look like a statue of a woman whose hands were knives. The Kingsguard were there in white that remembered better days. Janos Slynt was there with his watch in their black and their coins in their pockets. Littlefinger was there, careful, radiating harmlessness. Varys was there, odorless and smooth. Pycelle had dribbled something on his beard. Ned held up Robert's decree and read truth from it with a voice that had spoken vows before gods and before snow and had been believed. The words fell into the room like stones. Cersei did not flinch. She tore the paper in half and then in half again, and the sound of breaking truth made a small thin sound that yet found every ear. "We have a new king," she said and smiled. Ned turned to Janos Slynt because men had promised him. Slynt looked at him and nodded, and his gold cloaks moved as one, much like wolves except the wrong kind. They turned their spears, not toward the dais as they had sworn to do, but toward the hand. Jory was not there to die this time. He was already dead. Fat Tom fell with a sound like a sack of grain. The world narrowed to points and sweeps of steel and the too loud thunder of men's breath. Jon had no steel, only a blade of yardwood tucked useless into a belt like a foolish charm. He ripped it free anyway, and it broke on the first true sword it struck. The hound appeared between him and death as if he had been put there by a god with a poor sense of irony. He knocked aside the spear point aimed for Jon's guts with his shoulder and smiled a grimace Jon did not know how to read. "Go," he said through his teeth. "You're not part of this." "I am," Jon said and tried to be. A man took him by the arm from behind and twisted, and pain bloomed white up his shoulder, and he had not known pain had this sort of white. Littlefinger's dagger kissed his throat then, quick as a bird's beak, and smiles were happening behind him where he could not see them. "Don't," Littlefinger said lightly to Ned, "the way you tell a man not to scratch at a scab if you wish the wound to stay clean until you can sell it to someone. We could do something stupid, and we could all go home alone." Ned went very still. He set his sword down because the world had narrowed to one thing, and that thing was a boy with his throat to a knife. Then there was shouting, and Arya's little face appeared and disappeared like a fish in troubled water beyond the legs of men. And Syrio Farrell's thin, dark shape danced a dance that had nothing to do with the South. "Now," the hound said, and shoved Jon forward just enough that Littlefinger had to step and just enough that the knife missed where it had meant to whisper. Jon slammed his head back without thinking and felt cartilage crumple. The knife went bright, then dark. Then the hound's shoulder hit him again and he went down under a wave that had swords in it. It ended with Ned on his knees and the paper in shreds and the crown on a boy's head who did not wear it so much as it wore him, biting. It ended with Slint's men dragging John away and with Varys's hand light on Ned's shoulder, as if he were being comforted. It ended with Sansa sobbing and reaching for a queen, who held her like a pretty toy she had paid too much for. It ended with the Hound standing very still, breathing like a bellows, and looking at a blood drop on the floor as if his life depended upon the shape it made. They put Ned in a cell where the stones sweated and the straw had been too many men's only comfort. They put John in another cell far from his father and near enough to hear a man praying in a language that had learned to pray in chains. The dog that had made itself his lay in the corridor and would not be moved by blows, and so they fed it and made a joke of it. Varys came to Ned and spoke of paper and swords and of Joffrey's sudden taste for justice, which tasted like other men's blood. He came to John as well, later, quieter, and spoke of roads beneath cities where men walked who belonged to no house and yet knew the shape of houses better than their lords. "The city is my house," he said softly, "and you are in it. I have an obligation to those within my walls, even the ones who have been unwise." "Am I unwise?" John asked, and heard his own mirthless smile in it. "Only brave," Varys said. "Which is a kind." He looked at the boy for a long moment. "There is a way to make the queen less interested in you. Take the black." Varys's eyes flickered. "Not in truth, in story. A man may be dead to the world and still breathe." "I am to be made a liar too, then," John said. The word black clung. It had clung from the first time Benjen had spoken of old oaths that were stronger than winter. He had meant to wear black. He had meant it in the old way boys mean things with too much heat and too little salt. He had not meant to be brought to it by a paper that made him a son. "You may also die in truth," Varys said, "and your death will be very useful to men who are not you. If you live and become dull in the snow, your use to them lessens. I confess a fondness for dull heroes." "I was on my way to the wall," John said. "Before any paper." The words surprised him. He had forgotten he could surprise himself. "I wanted it. Wants change. Truths too." Varys folded his hands. "But a road is a road. Shall I bring you to yours?" There were many answers. John thought of Winterfell and of Robb's face when surprised by a thing he would pretend did not surprise him. He thought of Catelyn's mouth and the corner of it that sometimes softened when she watched Bran sleep. He thought of Arya's blade-quick feet and of Sansa's rose. He thought of the dog in the hall and of the hound in the yard. He thought of his father in the dark under the castle. And he thought of snow that was not a name but a season that forgives nothing and forgets everything except what it grows over. "I will go," John said, "but not for lies. I go for my father." "Who may die anyway?" Varys said gently. "Who may live?" John answered. "They moved in the night because the night is where all honest things in King's Landing try to happen." The little birds led like sparrows, hopping and stopping and looking around with their heads cocked. Arya slipped into them as if she had been a bird all along. Syrio had not come. Syrio had bought her a piece of time with his own life or luck, and she had already spent it. She held Needle as if breathing through it. When she saw John, she was 10 and then 12 and then 10 again. "Come on," she hissed. "We should save father," John said. "We save ourselves first," Arya said, and someone had told her that thing who had also told her how to say it without crying. He thought he knew the man. Varys's chosen path wound through the Red Keep's guts, through stone that had been poured and cut and mortared with blood, through tunnels whose making had made kings and traitors at the same time. They passed under the throne and heard men's words like rain hitting a roof. They passed by the cells and heard men praying and men cursing and men sleeping, and they passed a cell where John slowed without being able to say why. He saw a hand in darkness, a thin hand with long fingers that might have learned a lute once. The hand moved and stopped. A whisper moved with it and died. They came to the river where it lapped at the city's wall, as if the city were a thing it might eat slowly. A boat waited there with no light of its own, and a man in it who might have been a shadow waiting to become a man again if the dawn found him. They went in, quiet as mice, and the river took them, and the city receded. John held the oar when told and set it down when told and learned that doing as told can sometimes be harder than refusing it. They brought him to a dock that had no proper right to call itself anything, and there, wrapped in black as if that could make him invisible, waited Yoren of the Night's Watch, a man built of hard kindness, a man with lice like loyal soldiers. "We go north," he said without preamble, scratching and yawning. "We go now. Someone dies if we do not. Many will die if we do not," Varys said softly, and Yoren grunted as if that were a joke he'd heard before. Arya pressed herself to Jon a moment, hard enough he could count her ribs. "Find Robb," she said. "Bring him Ghost." She kicked herself for the slip, for the name of a wolf that was not, and glared as if daring him to say anything. "Bring him back." "I will bring myself back first," Jon said. He placed a hand on her head. He wanted to say 100 things to her, to tell her to eat and sleep and not to run headfirst into men with swords, to tell her to hold on to herself and to ask her to save the flower Sansa had crushed and to keep her sister from drowning in songs. He said none of those things. "Be a wolf." She showed teeth, fierce and small. "You too." They left her with Varys and the birds. They went into the night with Yoren and men who had chosen the dark because it was the only color that kept them from being seen. The road north is long and full of old names and older stones and men who have learned to be wolves because their lords forgot to be. Jon wore black that was not yet sworn. He wore Stark that had already been sealed and torn. He wore both as lightly as he could and found that both weighed the same in his bones. Behind him the city chewed. Sansa learned that songs have verses no one sings at home. Cersei taught her the shape of smiling and hunger. The Hound looked at the blood drop on the floor until it had dried, and then he looked away. Littlefinger set his ledgers in order and added a page. Varys counted his birds and found he had one more than he thought he'd had, and he set it free and watched where it flew. Pycelle wrote a letter and fell asleep over it. Renly thought of crowns made of flowers and left before thorns could take. The Knight of Flowers polished his sword and realized nothing of consequence had pricked him yet and felt both ashamed and relieved. Barristan Selmy stood before his white cloak and remembered oaths that had not bent, and he pressed his forehead against the cloth as if it could give him a piece of its spine. Ned Stark waited in his cell and spoke to the stones because there was no tree to speak to. He had made a boy of snow into a son of Stark, and for that he did not repent. He had set paper against a queen, and for that he did not repent. He had told a woman a truth that could kill her children, and for that he could not stop weighing the scales. He dreamed Lyanna in those nights, but she was not as she had been in the bed of blood. She was as she had been the summer before the bells. Hair tangled with weeds and smile like a secret only a brother could keep. She said nothing in the dream. She did not need to. He woke and found he was crying and laughed at himself because the time for that had been stolen when he had still thought there would be many. Yoren's party stretched out on the King's Road like a line of ants carrying crumbs. The road had been wetted by a thin, miserable rain that made everything smell of earth and horses and old leaves. The men wore their crime as if it were an extra cloak. A few children clung to the band because the world clung to them harder if they walked it without men with swords. Jon kept his hood up and his head down. He spoke little. He watched. He learned the shape of the wild along the road where men had cut it back, and it always grew there anyway, patient as a debt. "Keep your mouth shut till we need it," Yoren advised without heat. "If we go through a village, you've forgotten your name. If the wrong men ask, you wish to be a maester. If the right men ask, you wish to be a stone." Jon nodded. He did as he was told until he could not. A day's ride past the Trident. A band of men with no flag and clean boots and Lannister blades came out of a stand of alder as neat as if the alder itself had raised them. "The road is unsafe," their captain said. "Bandits." "So we heard," Yoren said, scratching. "You're very well armed for bandits." The captain smiled to show neat small teeth. "Orders from the Hand," he said. "The new Hand. There are wolves on the road." "Wolves don't pay the toll," Yoren muttered. "Everyone pays the toll," the captain replied. His gaze slid past Yoren and snagged on Jon, who could not help that he was built like a story. "You, Hood." "His face is not your business," Yoren said with sudden iron in him. "It will be if I decide it is," the captain said. John put his hand on Yoren's sleeve. "I am a recruit of the Night's Watch," he said, stepping forward. "We are the realms. We do not pay tolls." The captain's smile grew. "We all pay," he said again, softer. He gestured with 2 fingers, and 2 of his men stepped left and right before anyone else had thought to move. Their eyes were Lannister eyes, green or golden or pale as ale left too long in the sun. There is a moment when a man chooses. John had chosen already when he said recruit. He did not realize he had until he recognized that he could not unsay it. He straightened. "I am John of Winterfell," he said. He could not quite bring himself to say Stark. He did not know if he said it out of fear of making it heavier or out of kindness to Robb or out of something that felt too much like shame. "We ride to the wall." "Not today," the captain said, and the meanness in him was not personal, only useful. "Not without the Queen's leave." The dog that had followed John from the city had come along the road, impossible as that might seem, and now it pressed against John's leg with a low sound beginning in its chest. John set his hand on its head. He was very tired of being the place where men put their knives. "You do not have the Queen's leave," he said, and heard the hound in himself and heard Robb and heard Ned. "And you do not have the realms. You have only swords. So do other men." The captain's expression sharpened in irritation that a boy had made him show the next shape of his face. He lifted his hand, and somewhere down the line Yoren swore quietly because he had not meant to die there. The men behind John shifted. Arya had taught him how to feel a crowd's breath, how to know when it is about to go in or out. He saw the first spear dip. Arrows hissed. 12. More. They came out of the weeds to the left and the right, whispering death like insects. 3 of the captain's men went down with shafts in their throats and eyes. The rest scattered into a low crouch, shields up, looking for a target that was green and hard to find. The alder stand itself seemed to spit men. If wolves have banners, their banner is the way they move, as if the woods had taught them. The men that came wore no house colors and had been born under trees. They were not good men, likely. They were the sort the Kingsroad made when it rubbed the realm raw. But today their enemies' purses were larger than Yoren's, and the larger purse looked closer to them than their stomachs felt good about. "Wolves," the bandit captain called out from the wood. "You picked a fat deer to try your teeth on." Yoren had already pulled John backward by his cloak as if lodging had slipped. "Kill or run," he suggested low. The Lannister captain had dropped his smile. He made the quick calculation a man makes when the day has slid away from him and decided to live. "Later," he promised in John's direction, and dragged his men outward in a rough wheel with shields and curses and sullen skill. John's legs trembled as relief and the aftermath of fear rushed him like the same friend in 2 masks. Yoren snorted. "You invited a fight you didn't have numbers to finish," he observed, not unkindly. "I didn't," John said. "I only pointed to the road. You won't be any use at the wall if you bleed out on the Kingsroad," Yoren said. "Keep your head down. The watch needs men who can see in weather." They walked on, past Alder where kindly thieves had vanished, past puddles where the rain had set its small crowns and the boots of men had unseated them. John walked with the wrong name and the right one and found that both belonged to him in different ways. The wall rose far away in his mind like the only honest thing left. It is one thing to prefer snow. It is another to choose it. He would choose it. In King's Landing they put Lord Eddard Stark on a stone and set a sword above his neck in a boy king's hands to show the world a shape it would have to wear. Sansa begged, and Cersei smiled, and the hound looked at a drop of blood, and Littlefinger smiled with numbers, and Varys looked at the realm and wondered if mercy was a word it had ever learned. Perhaps on some other day, with other words spoken in other rooms, the sword would have fallen differently. On that day, words had already killed as many men as swords ever could, and the steel only wrote the last letter. Crowds have moods. The crowd that day had come to fed. It carried away pieces of a man to tell stories to children with, and it carried away pieces of itself, and it went home and tried to sleep. A girl with black hair went underfoot and got out. She took a name like water and learned it must be held or it will run away. North, the ravens went and the fires were lit. Robb Stark gathered old men who had learned their swords in autumn and young men who would learn them in winter, and he rode under a banner with a direwolf that had always been hungry and had finally remembered why. The great Jon shouted and frightened his horse, and it pleased him. Catelyn Stark watched the river and decided that she had too many sons and that the gods were cruel to make a woman think it. Bran listened to the trees rustle and learned that sometimes the wind speaks in words only boys who cannot walk yet can hear. Rickon howled because he did not know how else to tell the world it had hurt him. The men of the mountain clans sharpened knives that were not swords and called them swords anyway. By the time Yoren's little line reached a village that called itself the one next to the other village, the King's Road had begun to fill with men moving the wrong way, south, with their whole households on carts, with chickens and children in fear. War, one said, as if the sound of it would ward off the thing itself. War started. He did not say with whom. He did not have to. Jon did not speak. He had not yet sworn. He felt the oath like a cold stone in his mouth, turning it with his tongue, worrying it smooth. He slept little. When he did, he dreamed a white wood and a woman's face and a man with a hammer who might have been his father and might have been only a man. And he woke with the sense that snow was falling inside him. He wore a black cloak and a wolf under his skin and found that both could be true. On the day before the wall showed itself at last, pale and impossible against the sky, Yoren found him sitting a little apart from the fire, his back to a stump, eyes on the colorless distance. The dog had laid its head in Jon's lap, presumptuous and a comfort. "You'll say the words tomorrow," Yoren said, as if he were telling Jon the time of day. "I'll say them today," Jon said. His throat worked. "I should have said them years ago." "There's no should," Yoren said. "Only was and is. Don't say them because you think you'll be forgiven. Don't say them because you think you won't. Say them because you intend to keep them." Jon looked down at his hands. He turned them palm up, and they looked like his father's in a way that made him want to be careful with them. "I intend it," he said. "Good," Yoren said, and shuffled away because he had the grace to leave a man his own moment. Jon of Winterfell, Jon Stark, Jon Snow, Jon sat there with a dog's head heavy and warm on his knees and the sound of men in the dark and the smell of smoke and damp wool, and he spoke to the old gods in his chest because there was no heart tree here. He told them what he would do. He told them he had been made and unmade and made again. He told them his father was dead or might be dead, and that either way he would be a son to him not by name but by deed. He told them he would stand where other men turned aside. He told them he would hold when other men let go. He told them he would be the wall if it came to it. The sky did not answer. The cold did. And somewhere far south, in a city of warm stones and hot words, a queen lifted a cup and drank, and a girl with a rose forgot that it had once been white, and a man with a burnt face stared at his own hands as if he did not know who had put them there. A man with eyes like candlelight and a smile like regret moved a piece on a board he pretended not to own. A knight with a white cloak folded it very neatly and set it aside. A boy king pouted and began to learn what it was to be disliked by everyone whose liking mattered and loved by a crowd that would throw him to dogs as soon as it ran out of meat. Snow fell in Jon's mouth and he swallowed it, and it told him that he did not need to know how the story ended to say the words that would make his part of it true. He stood at last, and the dog rose with him, and the night sharpened like a blade. He went to the fire where Yoren sat, and the others watched him without speaking. The stars were hard above them, and the breath of men made ghosts of them all. "I am the sword in the darkness," he began, voice steady, and the darkness took his old name and gave him back something colder and harder and more his own than any paper could give. He spoke the oath to the cold and the stars and to a father who could not hear him, and when he had finished he felt the wall in him as if it had grown from his ribs. He took a breath and found that he did not need any man's leave. In that breath a new winter took root. The King's Road stretched south, crowded with men who had decided which names to kill for. The trident glittered with a light that remembered another battle and promised another. In a castle that rose from red stone, a girl drew breath and made a choice no song would ever teach her how to sing. In a hall of dark and white, a boy with a hammer looked toward a road, He had not meant to travel and wondered what the sound of it would be under his feet. In a long hall with banners that had not hung since the last foray that mattered, men of the watch drank thin ale and said the words with John and did not know they were saying them with him because distance is only a name for the same thing seen from other ends. The wall showed itself the next day, and it was not only ice. It was time made visible. It was the promise of an end and the promise of a beginning, and it made men feel very small and very necessary at once. Joran spat and grinned as if he had invented it. "There," he said unnecessarily. "There," John agreed. He stood and was looked upon by something older than kings and kinder than cities. He wondered if he had saved himself or exiled himself. He suspected there was no difference. He set his feet on the old stone. Behind him, the dog pressed close and was quiet. And for once the world was not a roar or a whisper. It was simply cold and true. From the south, ravens came with news written in hands that had not trembled and others that had. They brought war and crowns and the names of men dead before they were written. They brought a letter with no name at all, only a hand that had once steadied his on a chair in a farmer's kitchen when he was 5 and trying to cut bread. He did not open that one. He held it and he went to the top of the wall and he watched the wild that was not a city and waited to learn what he had chosen when he accepted a king's moment and a father's hand on his shoulder and the old words that ended a boy. The wind was full of snow that had not yet fallen. He breathed and the world moved forward, and this time he moved with it.